Morning Glory America, bonjour, hi Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live from Studio West, joined by United States Senator Tom Cotton, who comes from the SEC, where Georgia dominated TCU last night. I think we can agree, Senator Cotton, I think we can agree that Ohio State versus Georgia was the real national championship game.
Well, Hugh, judging by the score last night versus last weekend, I think that you won't get an argument from many people on that. But congratulations to the Georgia Bulldogs on their second consecutive national championship.
That's a big deal. Now, Senator, I want to start. You're on Judiciary. I am angry, as only maybe lawyers can be angry, about the fact that Joe Biden's classified documents have not been referred for review and possible prosecution for any irregularities to the special counsel, Jack Smith, who's been appointed to review the Donald Trump documents. Same set of laws, same set of facts. Both men are running for president. Why wouldn't Merrick Garland send them both to the special counsel?
Well, Hugh, I think your question is facetious because the obvious reason is Merrick Garland doesn't want a special counsel poking around his Democratic boss's private papers and potentially targeting him for prosecution. The double standard here is obvious, and I think it's going to get very thorough review from the House Judiciary Committee and my friend Chairman Jim Jordan. Something tells me that Dick Durbin, the Senate Judiciary Committee, won't be probing it carefully because the partisan double standard is so obvious here. It also suggests probably what should have been the case is that rather than sending Joe Biden's matter to this special counsel, Donald Trump's matter should have never been sent to a special counsel, that Merrick Garland should not have become the enforcer for a bunch of left-wing librarians at the archives. Rather, this matter should have been settled, as I think these disputes have traditionally been settled, in a series of ongoing negotiations and discussions between the lawyers for former presidents or vice presidents when they find that they have papers in their possession after leaving office and the archives claim that they have responsibility for. But there's going to be a thorough probe, I'm confident, in the House of Representatives of this obvious double standard.
Now, Senator, I want to know, because the new archivist of the United States, the old archivist with whom I worked well as the CEO of the Nixon Library, and we had this very issue. Are there classified documents in President Nixon's post-presidency papers? The very issue. Took about a year and a half to resolve. It took a constant line of communication. We ended up resolving it only after I cut off their revenue flow from the library. They are a bunch of left-wingers at the National Archives and Records Administration at the levels that do this. Not that David Ferriero was a fine man. He retired. There's now a vacancy. There's now a new nominee. Will you put a hold on that nominee until you've got everyone from the archives up in front of you to explain why they referred to justice the Trump papers and why they were even unaware or didn't refer the Biden papers?
Well, we'll do everything we can, Hugh, in a Democratic-run Senate to ensure that the archives gets appropriate oversight. I would note that Joe Biden's case in some ways is even more troublesome than Donald Trump's case because Joe Biden is a former vice president when these papers are involved. The vice president does not have the same prerogatives and the same kind of declassification authority that a former president does, whether it's Richard Nixon or Barack Obama or Donald Trump or anyone else. But again, these things under the Presidential Records Act probably ought not to be reviewed as criminal matters, rather as a series of ongoing negotiations. If there is the need for any legal action, that almost certainly should be a civil action of some sort, not appointing a special prosecutor to pursue Javert like the former president once again.
Both men are running for president, and therefore both men may fall under the regulations that apply to a special counsel because they're there for politically sensitive cases. But if one goes to Jack Smith, the other one certainly goes. Byron York reminded me, Senator Cotton, in the first hour, that when Ken Starr's investigation discovered the Monica Lewinsky blue dress, they went to the, at that time, 3-judge panel governing independent counsels and asked, what do we do with this? And they said, you keep it. You've already got the Clinton stuff. It's just so obvious to me when Merrick Garland comes before you on the Judiciary Committee. Are you going to ask him about this?
Hugh, I'm sure he'll get asked a lot of questions about that. It may not get down all the way down to the dais to me before he can, but it does. I will on why you would apply such an obvious double standard to the former Republican president and the current Democratic president. As you say, both appear to be running for president, so the same standard should be applying from the very beginning to both of them.
I've also been told, and I have not yet confirmed this, that the Biden classified files were identified 6 days before the midterms, but that was not made public. Is that of interest to you?
Hugh, again, I assume your question is facetious here because we all know why it wasn't made public at the time. For Joe Biden to reveal that he had classified papers at his Chinese-funded think tank 6 days before the midterm would have been explosive. And again, these are not the kind of papers, in many cases, that are in dispute with Donald Trump. I mean, I think some of the papers in Donald Trump's possessions were his letters to and from Kim Jong-un, which had shown to hundreds of people in the White House.
Yep.
Joe Biden faces very credible allegations of influence peddling involving his son and his brother and his family.
I hadn't thought about that.
With foreign governments. So
I had not thought about that.
I mean, maybe these things are very innocuous papers. How do we know these are not papers that he was taking along with his lawyers and his family members, poking around the vice presidential residence, trying to avoid complicity in his son's influence peddling in places like China and Ukraine and other foreign countries?
The reason I ask obvious questions is I elicit new information and new perspectives. I hadn't thought about the fact that the Chinese influence peddling intersects with this, and that Hunter Biden ought to go over to Jack Smith too, because those papers might connect up with Hunter Biden's laptop, and Jack Smith should have it all. Senator, I got to turn to the debt limit. I don't know when it comes up. You know that Treasury always lies about how close it is, and then you get there, and then they can manage the receipts. I want to know what you think the Republican message should be. It's very important in the House because they have more leverage than you folks do in the Senate, though it does take 60 senators to raise the debt limit. I am curious whether or not it ought to be the debt limit doesn't go up until the border shuts down. And that to shut the border down, we need the wall, we need doubling of the Border Patrol, we need a few things. Is that the message? Because we've got to be concise and we've got to be explicit, consistent, and repetitive.
Hugh, I suspect that the border and other immigration issues will be addressed in the annual spending bills. Speaker McCarthy, whom I congratulate and I commend House Republicans for unifying behind him, has said that they intend to pass individual appropriations bills through the House this year, and I hope that Chuck Schumer takes those up. And traditionally, going back 30 years now, the debt ceiling has been an occasion to try to address some of the drivers of our annual deficits and try to put in place parameters that are get spending under control. Most House members with whom I've spoken, I've heard publicly speak about it, say that's what they hope to do during the debt ceiling as well. I do think it's something that we should begin to negotiate sooner rather than later so we don't have the kind of 11th hour brinksmanship we've seen all too often. And it's something that both Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer are going to have to engage on because they're going to need 218 votes in the House of Representatives. And the Republican conference there is very focused on trying to address what is totally runaway spending after 2 years of the Biden administration. I don't know when the debt ceiling will increase. I'm not sure anyone does. I've heard anywhere from this summer to the end of the year. It depends on the economy and the pace of government revenues and government spending. But I do think that those negotiations should start sooner rather than later so we don't have 11th hour brinksmanship.
Well, we disagree on that because I think that the most important thing for the Republicans to do is to message a particular ask. And I really don't know what the ask should be. Maybe there is a budget ask that makes sense, like raising the retirement age or some, entitlement reform scares a bunch of people, but it's not really that scary if you look at it in small bites over a long period of time. But we've got to get a consistent ask. Do the Republican, and this is your conference and Speaker McCarthy's conference, can we get together and figure out, can you get together with the other Republicans on the Hill and figure out one message that we can repeat and repeat and repeat so that the left-wing media doesn't distort this again?
Yeah, Hugh, I agree with you on that. I just think that can take some time to kind of have a deliberative and careful negotiation among Republicans about the best way to address runaway spending in Washington. That's why we have a representative assembly from all across the country with two different chambers. But I do believe we'll coalesce around some kind of plan. It doesn't necessarily have to be what you just suggested. There's also ideas, for instance, to ensure that we don't have government shutdowns anymore, which is a leverage point that Democrats, especially Senate Democrats, have used for years, threatening to shut down the government if they don't get a ransom of tens of billions of dollars of domestic spending. How could you address that? There's plenty of ideas floating around out there that would automatically extend government funding, but keep it under last year's spending levels. That might exempt the Department of Defense from that, so they can't hold the Department of Defense hostage. There's a lot of great ideas.
That would be great,
We'll be debating those. I think we'll settle on one sooner rather than later.
Good, great. That is great news. Senator Tom Cotton, always a pleasure to talk to you. Have a safe trip into the Capitol today. I'm glad you're not driving in California where the wind and the rain is howling.